Sometimes people ask me if it was scary to swim underwater with a giant tail instead of legs. They imagine dark water, deep tanks, and holding my breath while hundreds of strangers watched from the other side of the glass. I always smiled and said, "You get used to it." That answer was easier than telling them the truth. The water was never the hardest part. The hardest part was smiling every single day while quietly watching the life I had dreamed of disappear. Looking back now, I don't think my dream ended all at once. It slipped away so slowly that I didn't even notice it was gone until years later. When little girls visited the aquarium, they pressed their tiny hands against the glass and looked at me like I belonged in a fairy tale. Their eyes sparkled. Some of them waved so hard that they almost fell over. Others whispered, "Mom, she's a real mermaid." I always waved back, I always smiled. And every single time, one thought crossed my mind: if only they knew the girl inside the costume. People only saw glitter, long red hair flowing through the water, and a beautiful smile. They never saw the sore muscles, the cracked hands, the endless overtime, or the young woman who had traded her biggest dream for a paycheck. My name is Emma Dawson, and this isn't a story about becoming a mermaid. It's the story of everything I had to become after giving up the person I thought I would be. Growing up in San Diego, the ocean always felt like part of my life. Some kids remembered baseball games or camping trips. I remembered salty air drifting through our apartment windows, seagulls waking me before sunrise, and my mom laughing whenever I complained about the smell of the sea. We didn't have much money, but somehow she made our little apartment feel warmer than houses twice its size. My mom, Sarah, had diabetes for as long as I could remember. When I was little, I didn't understand what that meant. I just knew there were mornings when she looked exhausted before the day had even started. Some nights I'd wake up and find her sitting quietly at the kitchen table with her medicine beside a cup of cold coffee. Even then, she'd look up, smile, and tell me everything was fine. Looking back, I think mothers become experts at hiding pain. Children grow up believing their parents are unbreakable. Then one day, life quietly introduces them to the truth. I believed my mom could fix anything. If the washing machine stopped working, she'd figure it out. If the rent was late, somehow she'd find a way. If Ethan and I needed something for school, she'd make it happen, even if it meant she went without something herself. I didn't realize until years later that every miracle she gave us had cost her something no one else could see. My little brother, Ethan, was the complete opposite of me. He could make friends anywhere. Teachers loved him. Neighbors remembered his name. He had this way of making people laugh without even trying. I used to joke that if we both got lost, someone would probably adopt Ethan before sunset while I'd still be reading a map. He hated when I teased him like that. I loved hearing him laugh. Back then, life still felt simple. Back then, we still believed hard work could solve almost anything. And maybe that's why my biggest dream never sounded impossible to me. I wanted to become a doctor. Not because of the money, not because people would respect me, not because it sounded impressive. I wanted to become the kind of doctor who could look at my mom one day and say, "You're going to be okay." That sentence became the dream I carried through high school, through every late-night homework session, through every exam I stayed awake studying for. I wasn't chasing a title. I was chasing hope. People think the hardest part of my job was holding my breath underwater. It wasn't. The hardest part was smiling while my whole life was falling apart. Every day, little kids stood in front of the glass and waved at me. Their faces lit up the moment they saw my shiny mermaid tail. "Mom, look, a real mermaid." I smiled and waved back every single time. I looked happy. I looked magical. But no one could see the young woman hiding inside that costume. No one knew that every smile was covering another goodbye, another dream, another piece of my life. Some dreams don't break in one moment. They disappear little by little, until one day you realize they're gone. My name is Emma Dawson. This is not the story of how I became a mermaid. This is the story of why I had to become one. I grew up in San Diego with my mom, Sarah, and my little brother, Ethan. We never had a big house. We never had nice cars. We never took expensive vacations, but somehow, our little apartment always felt like home. My mom had a way of making ordinary days feel special. Friday nights meant homemade pizza, even if it wasn't perfect. Sunday mornings meant pancakes that were never the same shape twice. Every birthday had a cake. It didn't matter if it came from a bakery or our tiny kitchen. She always found a way. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see as a child. A good mother doesn't give her children a perfect life. She gives them the best life she can, even when nobody notices what it costs her. My mom had diabetes for most of her life. When I was little, I didn't really understand what that meant. I just knew she took medicine every day. Sometimes she looked tired before breakfast. Sometimes she'd sit quietly at the kitchen table after work with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. If I asked whether she was okay, she'd smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart." That was her favorite answer. Now I know. She wasn't always fine, she just didn't want us to worry. Ethan was 4 years younger than me. He was funny. Loud. Always asking questions. He could make almost anyone laugh. Even on the days when Mom came home exhausted, Ethan somehow found a way to make her smile. I used to tell him, "One day you're going to talk so much that people will pay you just to be quiet." He'd laugh and throw a pillow at me. Those little moments didn't seem important back then. Today, I'd give anything to live one more ordinary day like that. Nobody tells you that the days you'll miss the most are the ones that felt completely normal when you were living them. Ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to become a doctor. Not because doctors made good money, not because people respected them. I wanted to become a doctor because of my mom. Every time I saw her check her blood sugar, every time I watched her hide the pain behind another smile, I made myself the same promise. One day, I'll take care of you. That dream became part of who I was. I studied harder than anyone in my class. While my friends went to parties, I stayed home with my books. Whenever school felt difficult, I reminded myself why I was doing it. I wasn't studying for grades. I was studying for my mom. And back then, I truly believed love and hard work could fix almost anything. By the time I finished high school, I had one clear goal. I was going to medical school. Nothing else mattered. Whenever someone asked what I wanted to do with my life, I answered without thinking, "I'm going to be a doctor." It felt so natural that I couldn't imagine saying anything different. Mom always smiled when she heard me say it. She'd shake her head and laugh. "Emma, you don't have to spend your whole life worrying about me." "I know," I'd tell her. "I'm doing it because I want to." That wasn't completely true. I wanted it because I loved her. There was a difference. Love has a funny way of changing our dreams. Sometimes we don't even notice we're choosing someone else's happiness over our own. Life was still hard, but we were making it work. Mom worked long hours at a local grocery store. The job wasn't easy. She stood on her feet all day. By the time she came home, she looked exhausted. Still, she'd ask about my classes before she even took off her shoes. "How was school? Did you eat lunch? How's Ethan doing?" She always put us first. Always. Ethan had started high school by then. He was smart, much smarter than he gave himself credit for. Math came easy to him, computers fascinated him. He could spend hours taking apart old electronics just to see how they worked. Mom used to look at him and say, "One day you're going to build something amazing." He'd roll his eyes and laugh. "Mom, you're embarrassing me." She'd laugh too. For a few seconds, our little apartment felt lighter. Those moments didn't last long enough. The first real sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening. Mom came home much earlier than usual. She looked pale. Her smile was gone. She set her purse on the kitchen counter and slowly sat down without saying a word. That wasn't like her. I walked over. "Mom, are you okay?" She forced a small smile. "I'm just tired." I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. Over the next few weeks, little things started changing. She stopped cooking dinner every night. She fell asleep on the couch almost as soon as she got home. Sometimes she'd lose her balance for a second before catching herself. She thought Ethan and I didn't notice. We noticed everything. The people who love you the most can see the pain you're trying the hardest to hide. One afternoon, I came home from class and found a stack of unopened medical bills on the kitchen table. Mom quickly picked them up. "Don't worry about these." I nodded. But that night, after everyone was asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about them. For the first time in my life, I was scared, not of losing my dream. I was scared of losing my mom. I kept telling myself everything would be okay, that the doctors would help her, that she'd get better, that our life would go back to normal. I didn't know it then, but that was the last season of my life that still felt simple. I wish I could tell you that things got better after that. I really do. For a while, I kept believing that maybe Mom was just overworked and needed some rest. Every morning, she still got dressed for work, brushed her hair, and smiled at us before walking out the door. She tried so hard to make everything look normal. But little by little, normal started disappearing. She came home earlier than she used to. Some evenings, she was too tired to eat dinner. Other nights, I'd hear her coughing in her room long after Ethan had fallen asleep. Whenever I asked if she wanted me to drive her to another doctor, she'd smile and say, "I'm okay, Emma. Save your energy for school." She never stopped thinking about my future, even when her own health was getting worse. Looking back now, I realize parents have a strange way of protecting their children. They carry heavy things in silence because they think love means keeping us from worrying. A few weeks later, Mom finally agreed to let me go with her to one of her appointments. I sat quietly in the waiting room, flipping through an old magazine without really reading it. When the doctor called us inside, I could tell by the look on his face that something wasn't right. He spoke calmly, but every word felt heavier than the last. Mom's diabetes was no longer under control. She needed more treatment, more medicine, and more rest. If she kept pushing herself the way she had been, things could become much more serious. Mom thanked the doctor with a polite smile, but I noticed her hands shaking as she picked up her purse. Neither of us spoke much on the drive home. The silence inside that little car said more than words ever could. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Mom sat across from me at the kitchen table. There was only one light on in the apartment, and it made the room feel smaller than ever. She reached across the table and held my hand. "Emma," she said softly, "promise me something." I looked at her and nodded. "No matter what happens to me, you keep going, you finish school, you become the doctor you've always wanted to be." I smiled because I knew that's what she needed to hear. "I promise," I whispered. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. It was a feeling I couldn't explain. Almost like life was quietly standing behind me, getting ready to change everything. Sometimes the promises we make with love become the promises that break our hearts the most. Over the next month, the bills kept piling up on our kitchen counter. Every time I walked past them, there seemed to be more. Hospital bills, pharmacy receipts, insurance letters. Mom tried hiding them inside a drawer, but there were too many. I started picking up extra hours at my part-time campus job just to help with groceries and electricity. It wasn't much money, but it made me feel like I was doing something. At night, after finishing my homework, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a calculator, trying to figure out how everything could possibly work. No matter how many times I added the numbers, the answer stayed the same. We didn't have enough. For the first time in my life, I understood that sometimes love isn't enough to solve a problem. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, the numbers simply don't add up. Life doesn't always ask what you want. Sometimes it quietly asks what you're willing to give. The day everything changed started like any other day. I woke up early, made coffee for Mom, and rushed to class. Before leaving, I kissed her on the forehead. She smiled and told me not to worry about her. "Go study," she said. "One day you'll be saving lives." I smiled back and walked out the door. If I had known what was waiting for me that afternoon, I would have stayed home a little longer. About halfway through my biology class, my phone started vibrating inside my backpack. I ignored it at first because our professor didn't allow phones during lectures. Then it buzzed again, and again. By the fourth call, I felt my stomach tight. As soon as class ended, I looked at the screen. It was Ethan. He had called 4 times in less than 10 minutes. I called him back right away. His voice was shaking. "Emma, Mom collapsed at work." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "What?" "They called an ambulance. They're taking her to the hospital." I don't even remember leaving campus. I grabbed my bag and ran. Every red light felt too long. Every minute felt like an hour. My mind kept repeating the same sentence over and over. "Please be okay. Please be okay." When I reached the hospital, Ethan was sitting alone in the waiting room. He looked scared, really scared. He stood up the moment he saw me and wrapped his arms around me without saying a word. My little brother had always tried to act tough. Seeing him cry made my heart sink. A doctor finally came out and asked to speak with us. He explained that Mom's blood sugar had dropped suddenly while she was working. She had also been ignoring other health problems for months because she didn't want to miss work. Her body had simply reached its limit. The doctor looked at both of us before saying something I'll never forget. "Your mother needs to stop working immediately." Those words hit harder than anything else. Mom wasn't just losing a job. She was losing the only steady income our family had. When we were finally allowed to see her, she looked so small lying in that hospital bed. She still smiled when we walked in. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I couldn't believe she was apologizing. I sat beside her and held her hand. "You have nothing to be sorry for." She tried to joke about the hospital food, but her voice was weak. Even then, she was trying to make us feel better instead of thinking about herself. The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall, they're the ones who keep worrying about everyone else, even while they're falling. That night, after Ethan had gone home to grab a few things, I stayed alone with Mom. She fell asleep for a while and I quietly opened the folder the hospital had given us. Treatment costs, medicine, follow-up appointments, special care. I turned each page slowly. The total made my heart stop. I didn't know where that kind of money was supposed to come from. I closed the folder, looked over at my sleeping mother, and for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I had never even considered before. What if I couldn't afford to keep chasing my dream anymore? The next morning, I woke up before the sun came up. I stood in the kitchen, making coffee for Mom and packing Ethan's lunch like it was any other day. I wanted everything to feel normal, even though I knew nothing was normal anymore. Mom walked into the kitchen with a slow smile and thanked me for breakfast. She looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was the kind that stayed in her eyes no matter how much she rested. She noticed me watching her and smiled. "Stop looking at me like that," she said. "I'm still your mom." I smiled back, but deep down I was terrified. I had spent my whole life believing my mother could handle anything. Now, for the first time, I wasn't so sure. After Ethan left for school, I sat down with Mom to go through our monthly bills. We spread everything across the kitchen table. Rent, electricity, water, insurance, medicine, hospital payments, grocery receipts. Every paper seemed heavier than the one before it. Mom picked up a calculator and quietly started adding numbers. After a few minutes, she stopped and placed it back on the table. She didn't have to say anything. I could already see the answer on her face. We were running out of money much faster than we were earning it. The room became so quiet that I could hear the old clock on the wall ticking above us. It felt like every second was counting down to something we weren't ready for. That afternoon, I went to my college campus, but I couldn't pay attention to a single lecture. My professor was explaining something that had once excited me, but the words sounded distant, almost like they were coming from another room. I looked around at my classmates. They were talking about exams, internships, and plans for medical school. Just a few weeks earlier, I had been one of them. Now I felt like I was standing on the outside, quietly watching everyone else move forward while my own future stood completely still. I kept asking myself the same question: how could I keep chasing my dream when my family needed me right now? That evening, I stopped by the student financial aid office before going home. I spent nearly an hour asking about scholarships, emergency grants, and part-time work. The woman behind the desk was kind. She searched through every option she could find, but in the end, she looked at me with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, Emma," she said. "I wish I had better news." I thanked her anyway and walked outside. I sat on a bench near the parking lot for a long time, watching students laugh with their friends as they headed home. For the first time since I started college, I cried. Not because I had failed. I cried because I was beginning to understand that sometimes life changes your direction even when you've done everything right. People think giving up is always a choice. Sometimes, it's the only way to keep the people you love from falling. When I got home that night, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table doing his homework. He looked up and smiled. "Guess what?" he said excitedly. "I got the highest score on my math test." I smiled and hugged him. "I knew you would." Mom clapped her hands and told him how proud she was. For a few minutes, our apartment felt warm again. We laughed. We ate dinner together. We talked about school. But after Ethan went to his room, Mom quietly reached for her medicine, and I noticed her hands trembling as she opened the bottle. That's when I realized something that scared me more than anything else. We weren't just running out of money. We were running out of time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the old fan turning above my bed. Every few minutes, another thought found its way into my mind. What if Mom needed another surgery? What if she got even sicker? What if we couldn't pay the rent next month? Around 2 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep and walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. The apartment was dark except for the small light over the stove. That's when I noticed Mom sitting alone at the table. She was looking through a folder filled with bills. She didn't hear me at first. She was too busy wiping tears from her face before anyone could see them. My heart broke. My mother had spent my whole life protecting me from her worries, and now she was sitting alone in the middle of the night, trying to carry them all by herself. I quietly walked over and sat beside her. She quickly closed the folder and forced a smile. "You should be sleeping," she whispered. I reached for her hand. "So should you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words ever can. The next morning, Mom received a phone call from her manager at the grocery store. I could hear only her side of the conversation, but I already knew what it was about. She thanked him for understanding, wished everyone at work the best, and quietly ended the call. She sat on the edge of the couch for several seconds, staring at the phone in her hand. Then she looked at me and smiled, but this time the smile didn't reach her eyes. "They can't keep my position anymore," she said softly. "They need someone who can work full-time." I walked over and hugged her without saying a word. She had worked there for almost 15 years. Those people weren't just coworkers. They had become part of her daily life. Losing that job felt like losing a part of herself. It wasn't only about the paycheck. It was about losing her independence, her routine, and the pride she felt every time she brought home a paycheck to support Ethan and me. Over the next several days, I started searching everywhere for work. Every morning after class, I'd visit restaurants, retail stores, coffee shops, and small businesses. I filled out application after application. Some managers told me they weren't hiring. Others said they needed someone who could work full-time, and my college schedule didn't fit. Every rejection felt heavier than the last. Still, I kept going because giving up wasn't an option. Every evening, I'd come home with tired feet and another handful of, "We'll call you if something opens up." Most of those calls never came. I tried not to let Mom see how discouraged I felt because she already blamed herself for everything. The last thing she needed was to think she had taken away my future too. One Friday afternoon, as I was walking home from another unsuccessful job interview, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, so I almost ignored it. Something told me to answer anyway. A cheerful woman introduced herself and said she worked in human resources at a place called Ocean World Aquarium. She explained that they were looking for performers for their underwater shows and had received my application from a local employment center a few days earlier. She asked if I could come in for an interview the following Monday. I stopped walking. For a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. I had completely forgotten that I had filled out that application. It had sounded so unusual that I never expected anyone to call. I finally smiled and said, "Yes, I'll be there." When the call ended, I looked up at the sky and let out a slow breath. It wasn't medical school. It wasn't the future I had planned. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like a small door had opened in front of me. I had no idea that walking through that door would change the rest of my life forever. Life rarely gives you the path you planned. Sometimes it quietly hands you a different one and waits to see if you'll have the courage to take the first step. The entire weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about the interview. I had never imagined myself working at an aquarium, and I definitely never imagined becoming a performer. On Monday morning, I borrowed one of Mom's old blouses, fixed my hair, and took the bus across town to Ocean World Aquarium. As soon as I walked inside, I heard children laughing and saw families standing in front of huge tanks filled with colorful fish. Everything felt bright and peaceful. For a moment, I forgot why I was there. Then I remembered the bills waiting on our kitchen table, took a deep breath, and walked toward the front office. The interview was much different than I expected. The manager asked about my swimming skills, whether I was comfortable performing in front of large crowds, and if I could stay calm underwater for several minutes at a time. I told her the truth. I had been swimming since I was a little girl because growing up near the ocean, it was something almost everyone learned. I wasn't a professional swimmer, but I felt comfortable in the water. She smiled and handed me a schedule for a training program. "If you complete the training," she said, "you'll have a chance to join our Mermaid performance team." My heart finally felt a little lighter. Then I looked at the last page and saw the training fee. The smile disappeared from my face. It wasn't an impossible amount of money for some people, but for me, it might as well have been. Every dollar we had was already going toward rent, groceries, and Mom's medicine. There was nothing left. I thanked the manager, folded the papers carefully, and walked outside. I sat on a bench near the parking lot, staring at the training schedule in my hands. Just when I thought I had found a way to help my family, another wall had appeared in front of me. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I had already spent too many nights crying over things I couldn't change. Sometimes the opportunity you've been praying for arrives, but it still asks you to climb one more mountain before you can reach it. That evening, I didn't tell Mom about the training fee. I only told her that the interview had gone well. She looked happier than she had in weeks and hugged me tightly. "I knew someone would see how special you are," she said. I smiled and hugged her back, but guilt quietly settled inside me. I didn't want to take away the little hope she had just found. After dinner, I sat alone in my room, looking at the training papers again and again, trying to think of a solution. I had no idea that within the next few days, two women I hadn't even met yet would change the direction of my life in a way I would never forget. I almost gave up before I even started. The next morning, I looked at the training papers one last time and thought about throwing them away. It seemed easier than holding on to another dream that I couldn't afford, but something inside me wouldn't let me quit without trying. I called the aquarium and asked if I could still attend the first day of training, even though I hadn't paid the full fee yet. The woman on the phone paused for a moment before saying, "Come in. We'll figure something out." Those 5 words gave me just enough hope to get on the bus. When I arrived, I was nervous. Everyone else looked confident, like they already belonged there. Some had experience performing. Others had backgrounds in swimming or dance. I felt completely out of place. I kept telling myself that I was only there because my family needed me, not because I believed I could actually become a mermaid performer. As I waited for the orientation to begin, a woman sitting beside me noticed how quiet I was. She smiled and introduced herself. "I'm Jessica Morales." I smiled back and told her my name. Before long, another performer joined us. "Rachel Brooks," she said with a friendly smile. Within a few minutes, the three of us were talking like we'd known each other for much longer than a single morning. During a short break, the conversation turned to the training fee. I tried to change the subject, but Jessica gently asked if everything was okay. I don't know why, but something about her made me feel safe. Maybe it was the way she listened without interrupting. Maybe it was because there was no judgment in her eyes. I quietly admitted that I didn't know how I was going to pay the fee. I wasn't asking anyone for help. I was simply telling the truth. Jessica looked at Rachel, and Rachel looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. Then Jessica reached into her bag, took out an envelope, and placed it on the table in front of me. Rachel quietly added some money beside it. I immediately shook my head. "I can't take this." Jessica smiled and gently pushed the envelope back toward me. "This isn't charity, Emma," she said. "It's a loan. When you're working with us, you can pay us back a little at a time." I felt tears filling my eyes. These two women had known me for less than an hour, yet they believed in me before I had even learned to believe in myself. Sometimes the people who change your life aren't the ones you've known the longest. They're the ones who show up when you need someone the most. I held the envelope tightly on the bus ride home. It wasn't just money, it was hope. That evening I told Mom everything. I told her about Jessica and Rachel, about the loan, and about the chance I had been given. Mom listened quietly, then wrapped her arms around me. "Never forget this kindness," she whispered. "One day, when life gives you the chance, do the same for someone else." I nodded. At that moment, I made 2 promises to myself. I would pay back every single dollar they had trusted me with. And no matter how hard the job became, I would never let their faith in me be wasted. Little did I know, the hardest part of my new life hadn't even begun. Training started the following week, and I quickly realized this job was nothing like it looked from the other side of the glass. People saw graceful movements, bright smiles, and beautiful costumes. They never saw the hours of practice behind them. Every morning, we spent time learning how to swim with the heavy mermaid tail, how to stay calm underwater, and how to smile even when our lungs were begging for air. The first few days were rough. I swallowed more pool water than I care to admit, bumped into the side of the training tank more than once, and came home with sore muscles I didn't even know existed. There were moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake. Then I'd think about Mom sitting at home with another stack of medical bills, and quitting stopped feeling like an option. After training, I didn't go home right away. I stayed behind whenever the supervisors needed extra help. Sometimes I cleaned equipment. Sometimes I helped organize costumes or prepared the backstage area for the next day's shows. The extra hours didn't pay much, but every dollar mattered. Jessica and Rachel often stayed late too. We'd sit together for a few minutes before heading home, sharing cheap sandwiches from the cafe across the street and laughing about the little mistakes we had made during training. Those quiet conversations became my favorite part of the day. They never made me feel embarrassed about my situation. They treated me like a friend, not someone they had helped. As the weeks passed, my body slowly adjusted to the work, but it also carried the signs of it. Skin on my hands became rough from spending so much time in the water and handling equipment. My shoulders ached almost every night. My hair was constantly dry, no matter how much conditioner I used. Some evenings I was so exhausted that I fell asleep on the couch before dinner. Mom would gently wake me up with a blanket over my shoulders and a warm plate of food waiting on the table. She'd smile and say, "You worked hard today." I'd smile back, even though I could barely keep my eyes open. Often admire the finished picture. Very few ever noticed the hands that worked quietly to paint it. A month later, Mr. Collins, the night shift manager, called me into his office. For a second, I thought I had done something wrong. Instead, he smiled and said, "Your trainers have noticed something. You never complain, you're always willing to help, and you improve every single day. We'd like you to perform in this Saturday's Mermaid show." I just stared at him. My first real performance. The moment I had been working toward since I walked through the aquarium doors. I thanked him, but as I left his office, excitement quickly mixed with fear. In just a few days, hundreds of strangers would be watching me through a wall of glass, believing they were looking at a magical mermaid. None of them would know they were really watching a young woman who was simply trying to keep her family together. Morning of my first show, I woke up before my alarm. I wasn't nervous because of the audience. I was nervous because I needed this job to work. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tied my hair back, and looked at myself for a long moment. Just a few months earlier, I had imagined wearing a white lab coat with my name stitched across the front. That dream now felt very far away. Instead of getting ready for medical school, I was packing a swimsuit, waterproof makeup, and a mermaid tail. Life had changed so quietly that sometimes I still couldn't believe it. When I arrived at the aquarium, everyone was busy preparing for the weekend crowds. Jessica noticed how nervous I looked and gently bumped my shoulder. "Relax," she said with a smile. "The kids aren't looking for perfection, they just want to believe in a little magic." Rachel laughed and added, "And if something goes wrong, just keep smiling. Trust me, nobody notices half the things we worry about." Their words made me laugh, and for the first time that morning, I felt my shoulders relax. It reminded me how lucky I was to have people who wanted me to succeed. A few minutes before the show started, I slipped into the sparkling blue mermaid tail for the very first time. It was heavier than it looked, and moving around in it wasn't easy. One of the trainers helped lower me into the water, and suddenly everything became quiet. The noise from outside faded away. I could hear only the gentle sound of the water around me and the steady beat of my own heart. Then the music started, and I saw dozens of children running toward the giant viewing window with huge smiles on their faces. I took a deep breath and disappeared beneath the surface. The moment I swam into view, the children pressed their hands against the glass. Some waved excitedly. Some jumped up and down. One little girl placed both hands over her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I smiled, waved, and slowly twirled through the water just like we had practiced. For a few beautiful minutes, I forgot about the hospital bills, the rent, and everything waiting for me outside those walls. I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was simply giving those children a reason to smile. When the show ended and I climbed out of the tank, my whole body was shaking from exhaustion. My legs felt weak and my arms ached from swimming. I sat quietly backstage, trying to catch my breath. Just then, Mr. Collins walked over and handed me a small envelope. "Nice job today," he said. "That's your first paycheck." I looked down at the envelope in my hands, and tears filled my eyes before I even opened it. It wasn't a large amount of money, but it was the first paycheck I had ever earned doing something that could truly help my family. That day, I learned something I'll never forget. Sometimes your first paycheck isn't valuable because of the money inside it. It's valuable because it reminds you that, no matter how hard life gets, you still found a way to keep going. That evening, I stopped at a grocery store before going home. I bought Mom's favorite soup, fresh fruit she hadn't been able to afford in weeks, and a small chocolate cake. It wasn't anyone's birthday. There wasn't any special occasion. I just wanted our home to feel happy again, even if it was only for one night. When I walked through the front door carrying those bags, Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. She didn't ask how much I had earned. She didn't ask how tired I was. She simply hugged me and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." At that moment, I believed every sacrifice would be worth it. I had no idea that the hardest sacrifices were still waiting for me. The weeks turned into months, and before I realized it, Ocean World Aquarium had become my second home. I learned every corner of the building, every performance schedule, and every smiling face behind the scenes. The children still saw a happy mermaid waving through the glass, but my coworkers knew the real Emma. Jessica and Rachel never stopped checking on me. Every Friday, after I received my paycheck, I put a small amount into an envelope and handed it to one of them. They always smiled and told me there was no rush, but I insisted. That money wasn't just a loan. It was a reminder that someone had believed in me when I had almost stopped believing in myself. A few months later, I finally handed them the last payment. Jessica hugged me and laughed. "I knew you'd pay us back." I smiled and said, "I promised I would." Then Rachel looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Emma, good people don't stay in your life because they need something from you. They stay because they care." Those words stayed with me long after that day. Things at home slowly became more stable. We weren't comfortable, but we weren't falling behind every month anymore. My paycheck covered the rent, groceries, and most of Mom's medicine. Ethan never had to worry about whether he could stay in school. I made sure of that. If he needed new books, I bought them. If he needed money for a school trip or supplies, I found a way. Sometimes that meant working extra shifts at the aquarium. Sometimes it meant giving up the only day off I had that week. I was always tired, but every time I saw Ethan studying at the kitchen table, I reminded myself why I was doing it. I wanted at least one person in our family to keep chasing the dream that life had taken away from me. Mom noticed everything, even when she pretended she didn't. One evening, she quietly took my hand and said, "Emma, you've already given this family more than I ever wanted you to give." I smiled and gently squeezed her hand. "We're going to be okay," I told her. At that moment, I truly believed it. I believed that if I kept working hard enough, life would eventually become easier. I believed our hardest days were behind us. Looking back now, I realize I couldn't have been more wrong. Sometimes life lets you catch your breath, only because another storm is already on its way. That was the year I stopped living for my own future and started living for someone else's. I didn't regret it then. If you had asked me whether I would make the same choice again, I would have said yes without thinking. Ethan was growing into a bright young man with big dreams, and seeing him succeed made every long shift and every sore muscle feel worth it. I had no way of knowing that the little boy I had spent years protecting was about to walk toward a future that no longer had room for us in it. When people ask me what my biggest achievement was, they usually expect me to talk about the aquarium. Some even think I'll say it was learning how to perform underwater without being afraid. The truth is, none of that ever felt like an achievement to me. If you had asked me back then what made me happiest, I would have pointed to my little brother sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of college books. Every overtime shift, every sore muscle, every birthday I worked instead of celebrating, it all felt worth it because Ethan's future was still moving forward. Mine had stopped a long time ago, but his was just beginning, and somehow, that became enough for me. The first year of college changed Ethan in the best possible way. He loved learning, made good grades, and called home almost every evening. Mom would sit on the couch with her phone in both hands, waiting for his call like it was the best part of her day. The moment his name appeared on the screen, her whole face lit up. We'd put the phone on speaker, and he'd tell us about his professors, difficult assignments, and the new friends he had made. Before hanging up, he'd always say the same thing. "Thanks for everything, Emma. I know I wouldn't be here without you." I'd laugh and tell him to stop making me emotional. Back then, I believed those words would always stay true. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan came home for the weekend with someone I had never met before. The moment they walked through the front door, he smiled and said, "Emma, Mom, there's someone I want you to meet." Standing beside him was a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Hi," she said. "I'm Madison Reed." She wasn't loud or trying to impress anyone. Instead, she walked straight over to Mom, shook her hand gently, and asked how she was feeling. That simple question told me a lot about her. She wasn't interested in pretending to be perfect. She genuinely cared about people. Before the evening was over, she was helping Mom clear the dinner table, laughing with us in the kitchen, and making Ethan smile in a way I hadn't seen before. As I watched the two of them together, I remember thinking, if my brother is going to fall in love, I hope it's with someone exactly like her. Madison became part of our lives so naturally that it almost felt like she had always been there. She never showed up empty-handed. Sometimes she'd bring homemade cookies because she knew Mom loved sweets, but had to be careful with her diabetes. Other times she'd stop by with fresh flowers from the local farmer's market, saying they were on sale even though I secretly suspected she had paid full price. She treated Mom with a kind of patience that couldn't be faked. Instead of feeling awkward around her illness, she'd sit beside her, ask about her day, and listen to the same stories she had already heard before. Mom adored her. More than once, after Madison went home, Mom looked at me with a smile and whispered, "That girl has a beautiful heart." Whenever Ethan came home from college, the four of us spent as much time together as we could. We'd cook dinner, watch old movies, and laugh over stories from Ethan's classes. For a little while, our apartment felt like it had before life became so heavy. Madison never made Ethan feel embarrassed about our small home or our financial struggles. In fact, one evening I quietly apologized because we couldn't take them to a nicer restaurant. She looked at me like I had said something ridiculous and replied, "Emma, some of my favorite memories are sitting around this little kitchen table." It was such a simple sentence, but it stayed with me because it was honest. She loved Ethan for who he was, not for what he might become. The right people don't make your hard days disappear. They simply make those days feel a little less heavy. As Ethan moved closer to graduation, new opportunities began appearing faster than any of us expected. His professors praised his work, companies started reaching out, and he was invited to interviews with several well-known technology firms. I was proud of him, truly proud. Every rejection, every overtime shift, and every dream I had quietly packed away suddenly felt like they had a purpose. One evening, Ethan rushed through the front door holding a large envelope in his hand. His face said everything before he even spoke. "Emma," he said, barely able to contain his excitement, "I got it." He had been offered a paid internship with a major technology company in Seattle. It was the kind of opportunity most graduates only dreamed about. Mom started crying before he even finished explaining the offer, and I hugged him so tightly that he laughed and said, "You're crushing me." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room thinking about everything that was about to change. Seattle was almost 3,000 miles away. It wasn't a weekend drive. It wasn't a quick visit. For the first time, Ethan wouldn't just be away at college. He would be building a new life in another city. I kept telling myself that this was exactly what we had worked for. This was the future we had sacrificed to give him. Still, a quiet voice deep inside me kept whispering something I didn't want to hear. Sometimes the dreams we help build become the very things that carry the people we love farther away from us. The weeks before Ethan left for Seattle were filled with excitement. Our little apartment was covered with open boxes, shipping labels, and checklists taped to the refrigerator. Mom kept asking if he had packed enough warm clothes because she had heard it rained all the time in Seattle. Ethan laughed every single time and told her, "Mom, I'm moving there, not climbing a mountain." She'd roll her eyes, smile, and quietly sneak another sweater into his suitcase anyway. Watching them made me happy. It also reminded me how much Mom was trying to hide. Every smile on her face was followed by a long, quiet look after Ethan walked out of the room. She knew this wasn't just another semester at college. She knew our family was about to change. Madison helped almost every evening. She folded clothes, organized paperwork, and even created a little notebook filled with emergency phone numbers, important addresses, and reminders because she said Ethan was terrible at keeping track of those things. One night after Ethan stepped outside to take a phone call, Madison stayed behind in the kitchen with me. She looked at me for a moment before speaking. "Emma," she said softly, "I know how much you've given up for him. I hope he never forgets that." I smiled because I truly believed he never would. "He won't," I answered without hesitation. "Ethan has a good heart." Madison smiled back, but there was something thoughtful in her eyes, almost as if she wanted to say more and decided not to. The morning Ethan left, Mom hugged him for so long that he finally laughed and said, "Mom, I'm going to miss my flight." She smiled through her tears and fixed the collar of his jacket one last time. I carried his last suitcase to the car and closed the trunk. Before getting in, he wrapped his arms around me. Everything I have is because of you, he whispered. I promise, this is just the beginning. When I'm settled, things are going to get so much easier for all of us. I believed every word. I hugged him back and told him not to worry about us. Just go chase your dream, I said. We'll be right here when you come home. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that sound temporary. For the first few months, everything felt exactly the way we had hoped. Ethan called almost every night. He sent us pictures of Seattle, told us about his new apartment, and couldn't stop talking about how much he loved his job. He asked about Mom's health, reminded me not to work too many overtime shifts, and even started sending money home whenever he could. Mom would smile after every phone call and say, "He's still the same boy." I smiled too because I believed it. Looking back now, I think that's what made everything that happened later hurt so much. The distance didn't appear overnight. It arrived quietly, one missed phone call at a time. For a while, we found a rhythm that almost made the distance disappear. Every Sunday evening, Ethan called at exactly 7 o'clock. Mom would start setting the dinner table half an hour early because she wanted us all together when the phone rang. We'd eat while talking to him, and for an hour it felt as if he were sitting in his old chair again. He told us about rainy mornings in Seattle, difficult projects at work, and the little coffee shop he visited before heading to the office. Sometimes he'd laugh and say, "Emma, you would love this place." I'd smile and tell him that one day I'd come see it for myself. Those calls became something we all looked forward to. They reminded us that even though Ethan lived on the other side of the country, he still felt like part of our everyday lives. Then little by little, things started changing in ways that were easy to explain at first. One Sunday, Ethan texted instead of calling. "Sorry, had to stay late at work, I'll call tomorrow." Tomorrow became 2 days later. The next week, his call lasted only 10 minutes because he had another meeting early the next morning. Then another week passed, and he apologized because he was out with coworkers. Every excuse sounded reasonable. Every explanation made sense. I kept telling Mom not to worry because I knew how demanding a new career could be. Deep down, I believed what I was saying. After all, this was the future we had worked so hard to give him. Mom tried not to let it bother her, but I could see the disappointment she carried after every missed call. She never complained. Instead, she'd quietly leave his favorite chair empty at the dinner table, almost as if she expected the phone to ring at any moment. One evening, while folding laundry, she smiled and said, "He's probably just busy building his life." I nodded and smiled back, but the apartment suddenly felt much quieter than it used to. I missed hearing Ethan laugh from his bedroom. I missed arguing with him over which movie we were going to watch. I even missed reminding him to take the trash out. Strange how you don't realize how loud love is until it slowly fades into silence. A few weeks later, Madison came by the apartment carrying a small container of homemade soup for Mom. She looked different. Her smile was still there, but it seemed forced. While Mom rested in her room, Madison and I sat alone in the kitchen. She stirred her coffee for a long time before finally speaking. "Have you talked to Ethan much lately?" she asked quietly. I told her not as often as before and blamed his busy schedule. She looked down at her cup and nodded slowly. "He's been busy with me too," she said. "Sometimes it takes him days to answer a message." She tried to laugh it off, but I could hear the hurt in her voice. That was the first moment I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was simply the quiet feeling that the life we all believed would bring our family closer together was beginning to pull us in different directions. After that conversation, I started paying closer attention, not because I wanted to judge Ethan, but because I wanted to understand what was happening. Every time Mom asked, "Did your brother call today?" I found myself checking my phone before answering. Some days there was a short text. Other days there was nothing at all. When he did call, the conversations felt different. They were polite but rushed. He still asked how Mom was feeling, but he didn't wait to hear the full answer. He'd say, "I'm sorry, Emma. Things are just crazy at work right now." And before I knew it, the call was over. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. It was easier than admitting that something inside my little brother was slowly changing. Madison stopped visiting as often, but whenever she did, she looked more tired than the time before. One rainy afternoon, she came over while I was getting ready for work. Mom was taking a nap, so we sat quietly in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee between us. She looked down at the table for a long time before speaking. "I don't think Ethan tells me everything anymore," she said softly. "Sometimes I'll see pictures online of dinners with coworkers or weekend trips, and I find out about them the same way everyone else does." She gave a small smile, trying to make it sound like it didn't hurt. It didn't work. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Have you talked to him about it?" I asked. She nodded. "He always says the same thing. He's busy, he's tired, work has been overwhelming." None of those reasons sounded impossible. They just sounded incomplete. A few weeks later, Ethan came home for the holidays. Mom spent 3 days cooking his favorite meals. She cleaned the apartment from top to bottom and even bought new curtains because she wanted everything to look nice when he walked through the front door. When he finally arrived, she hugged him with tears in her eyes. For a little while, everything felt normal again. We laughed over dinner, looked through old family photo albums, and listened to Ethan tell stories about Seattle. But something was different. Every few minutes, his phone lit up. Sometimes he smiled at the screen before quickly putting it face down on the table. Other times he'd excuse himself to answer a call outside. He was sitting in the same room with us, yet part of him always seemed to be somewhere else. I noticed Madison noticing it too. She didn't say a word, but the smile she had brought into our home months earlier had almost disappeared. Distance doesn't always begin with miles. Sometimes it begins when someone's attention slowly starts living somewhere else. The day before Ethan was supposed to fly back to Seattle, Madison asked if we could meet for lunch. We found a quiet little diner a few blocks from the aquarium, the kind of place where the waitress remembered your order after just a couple of visits. Madison looked exhausted. She wrapped both hands around her coffee, but she never took a sip. After a long silence, she looked at me and quietly said, "I think I'm losing him." My heart sank. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that everything would go back to the way it used to be, but I couldn't. Deep inside, I had started feeling the same thing. She explained that Ethan had canceled plans more times than she could count. Sometimes he disappeared for an entire weekend with barely a message. When she asked if something was wrong, he always had another excuse. More work. Another deadline. Another business trip. "I'm not asking for all of his time," she whispered. "I just don't want to feel like I'm the last thing on his list." I didn't know how to comfort her, because I was trying to comfort myself at the same time. The Ethan she described didn't sound like the brother I had spent years believing in. This was the same boy who used to ride 2 buses just to surprise Mom on her birthday. The same brother who once worked a part-time job so he could buy me a bracelet for my birthday. People don't usually wake up as someone completely different. Life changes them one choice at a time, and sometimes the people who love them don't notice until those choices have carried them somewhere they can no longer reach. A few days after Ethan returned to Seattle, Madison came by the apartment one last time. Mom made tea, and the three of us sat together in the living room. Madison tried to smile, but tears filled her eyes before she could finish her first sentence. "He ended things," she said quietly. "He told me our lives are moving in different directions." The room fell completely silent. Mom reached over and held her hand without saying a word. I could see the heartbreak on Madison's face, but what hurt me almost as much was knowing that Ethan had ended a relationship with someone who had stood beside him long before he had success, a good job, or a new life in Seattle. She had loved him when he had nothing. Now she was walking away with nothing except memories. After Madison left, Mom stayed unusually quiet. That evening, while I helped her organize her medication, she looked out the window and said something I'll never forget. "Success doesn't scare me, Emma." I looked at her. "What scares me is when success makes someone forget the people who helped them get there." I wanted to disagree. I wanted to defend my brother the way I always had. Instead, I lowered my eyes because, for the first time, I couldn't honestly tell myself that Mom was wrong. Sometimes the first person to notice a changing heart isn't family, it's the person who loved that heart before the world did. After Madison left our apartment that afternoon, life became quieter than I ever thought possible. She still sent Mom a text every now and then to ask how she was feeling, but she never spoke badly about Ethan. Not once. That told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person she was. She carried her heartbreak with grace and walked away without trying to turn us against him. Mom often said, "That girl deserved kindness." Every time I heard those words, I wished things had ended differently. Some people leave your life because they stop loving you. Others leave because the person they loved slowly disappears. The months that followed felt different. Ethan still called, but now it was every couple of weeks instead of every few days. Then every few weeks became once a month. His conversations grew shorter. He always sounded rushed, like he was already thinking about the next meeting before the call had even begun. "I'll come visit soon," he would say. "Things are just really busy right now." We believed him the first few times. Then birthdays passed. Holidays came and went. Empty promises slowly replaced real visits. Mom never complained to him. She would simply smile after hanging up the phone and say, "At least I got to hear his voice." But later that night, I'd sometimes find her sitting by the living room window, quietly looking outside as if she were still expecting him to pull into the parking lot. I tried to keep our home feeling normal. I worked my shifts at the aquarium, came home, cooked dinner, helped Mom with her medication, and pretended everything was fine. But there were little reminders of Ethan everywhere. His old bedroom stayed exactly the way he had left it. Mom refused to let anyone move a single thing. His graduation picture remained on the hallway wall. His favorite coffee mug stayed in the cabinet even though no one used it anymore. Our apartment slowly became a place filled with memories instead of people. I never realized how loud silence could be until it started living with us every single day. One evening, Mom folded one of Ethan's old sweatshirts and placed it back in his closet. She smiled softly and said, "Maybe he'll need it when he comes home this winter." I smiled back because I couldn't bring myself to take that hope away from her. The truth was, I had already stopped waiting for the sound of his key in the front door. I still loved my brother with all my heart, but love and reality had quietly become two different things. Standing there in the doorway of his empty room, I finally understood something I had been avoiding for months. You can spend years helping someone build a bridge toward their future, and one day realize they never looked back to see who was still standing on the other side. That was the moment I accepted the truth I had been fighting. I hadn't lost my brother all at once. I had lost him little by little, through missed calls, broken promises, and growing silence. I just didn't know that life was about to ask even more of me, because while I was still learning to live without the brother I had raised, the person who needed me most, my mother, was about to face the hardest battle of her life. The year after Ethan stopped calling regularly, Mom's health took another turn. At first, it was little things that were easy to ignore. She became tired after walking across the apartment. She stopped cooking because standing in the kitchen for too long made her dizzy. Some mornings, I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, trying to catch her breath before getting dressed. Every doctor's appointment ended the same way. More medication, more tests, more warnings to be careful. I kept hoping things would level out, but deep down, I knew diabetes had been quietly taking pieces of her health for years. It was simply moving faster now. One afternoon, I received a call from one of her doctors while I was getting ready for the afternoon Mermaid show. The doctor's voice was calm, but the words hit me like a wave. Mom had developed a serious infection in her foot. Because of her diabetes, it wasn't healing the way it should. They wanted her admitted to the hospital immediately. I didn't even change out of my work clothes. I grabbed my bag, told Mr. Collins there was a family emergency, and drove straight to the hospital. When I walked into her room, Mom smiled the same way she always did, as if she were the one trying to comfort me. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, but I couldn't force myself to smile back. Something inside me was telling me this wasn't going to be another routine hospital stay. The doctors did everything they could over the next several days. They tried different treatments, stronger medication, and every option they believed might save her leg. I spent my mornings at the hospital and my evenings at the aquarium because we still needed the income. Most nights, I barely slept. Jessica and Rachel quietly covered some of my shifts whenever they could, and Mr. Collins never once complained when I had to leave early. I don't think I could have survived those weeks without them. There were days when I felt like I was living two completely different lives. In one, I smiled underwater while children waved at a mermaid. In the other, I sat beside my mother's hospital bed, praying that she wouldn't lose another part of herself. Then came the conversation I had been dreading. The surgeon sat across from us with a folder in his hands and spoke as gently as he could. The infection had spread too far. If they waited any longer, it could become life-threatening. The safest option was to amputate Mom's lower leg. I looked at the floor because I couldn't bear to see the expression on her face. The room was completely silent until Mom reached over and placed her hand on mine. "Emma," she said quietly, "look at me." I finally did. She smiled through her tears and whispered, "It's only a leg. I'm still your mom." I nodded, but the tears I'd been holding back finally escaped. No child is ever ready to hear something like that from the person who has always been their strongest protector. The strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who somehow find the strength to smile, even after life has taken something they can never get back. The surgery was successful, but the woman who came home a few weeks later wasn't the same woman who had walked into the hospital. Physically, she was healing. Emotionally, she was trying to figure out how to live in a body that no longer felt familiar. Simple things became difficult. Walking from the bedroom to the living room took time. Getting into the shower required help. Carrying a cup of coffee across the kitchen suddenly felt like a challenge. Every time I reached out to help, Mom would smile and say, "I can do it." Sometimes she could. Sometimes she couldn't. The hardest part wasn't watching her struggle. It was watching a woman who had spent her entire life taking care of everyone else slowly, except that she now needed someone to take care of her. Our apartment changed with her. We moved furniture to make more space for her wheelchair. We installed small safety rails in the bathroom. I learned how to help her move without making her feel helpless. At the aquarium, I picked up even more shifts because the medical bills seemed endless. Some nights I came home so exhausted that I fell asleep in my work clothes on the couch. I'd wake up an hour later with a blanket over me and find Mom sitting nearby, looking at me with tears in her eyes. "You work too hard," she'd whisper. I'd smile and tell her I was fine. The truth was, I didn't know how to stop. If I stopped, everything we had fought to hold together might fall apart. I called Ethan more than once during those weeks. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't. When we did talk, he sounded genuinely concerned. He asked about Mom's recovery and promised he would come as soon as he could. "Things are really busy right now," he said. "I'm trying to finish a huge project at work." I told him I understood because I didn't want him carrying guilt while he was so far away. After we hung up, Mom would always ask the same question. "Did he say when he's coming?" I hated that question because I never had a real answer. "Soon," I'd tell her. "He said he'll come soon." She'd smile and nod, holding on to that one word as if it were a date written on a calendar. Weeks turned into months. The projects ended, but another deadline always appeared. One business trip became another. One apology became the next. Ethan kept saying he missed us. He kept saying he loved us. I believed he meant those words, but love isn't measured only by what we say. Sometimes it's measured by where we choose to be when the people we love need us most. Mom never stopped defending him. "He's building a life," she'd remind me whenever disappointment crept into my voice. "We wanted this for him." I would nod because she was right. We had wanted this for him. We just never imagined that building his future would slowly erase his place in ours. The hardest promises to forgive are the ones that are broken a little at a time. One cold November morning, I was getting ready for work when Mom called my name from her bedroom. There was something different about her voice. It was weaker than usual. I rushed in and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing heavily. She tried to smile when she saw the worry on my face, but this time she couldn't hide how much she was struggling. I called an ambulance, grabbed her hospital bag, and held her hand the entire ride. She kept apologizing for being a burden. Hearing those words hurt more than anything else. I looked at her and said, "Mom, you spent your whole life carrying me. Let me carry you now." She closed her eyes, squeezed my hand, and didn't say another word. The doctors admitted her immediately. They explained that her diabetes had caused more complications, and her body was becoming weaker. They did everything they could, but they also told me something no daughter is ever ready to hear. We needed to prepare for the possibility that she might not recover this time. I walked into the hallway, leaned against the wall, and cried for the first time in years. Not because I wanted to give up, but because I was terrified of imagining a world where my mother wasn't in it. For as long as I could remember, every decision I made had started with one question. What does Mom need? I didn't know who I would be without that question. I called Ethan as soon as I could. This time, he answered right away. I told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then he said, "Emma, I'll book the first flight I can." It was exactly what I had hoped to hear. I thanked him and went back into Mom's room with a little hope in my heart. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she asked wasn't about herself. It was, "Did you talk to your brother?" I nodded and smiled. "He's coming, Mom." The relief on her face was impossible to describe. She closed her eyes again and whispered, "Good. I just want to see my son." For the next 2 days, she kept looking toward the hospital door every time footsteps echoed in the hallway. Every time a nurse walked in, I saw that tiny spark of hope appear in her eyes before quietly fading away. Ethan called several times. Each call ended with another apology. Bad weather had delayed one flight. Then another connection had been canceled. He promised he was trying. I believed he was. But belief didn't change the empty chair beside Mom's bed. Sometimes life doesn't break your heart with cruel words. Sometimes it breaks it by making you wait for someone who never arrives.